All right. Hello, everyone. And thanks for joining us this afternoon for our presentation on the emergent topic of oral nicotine pouches. As many of you know, nicotine pouches have actually been around for a while, but only in the last couple of years has interest and use really exploded. And so the importance of understanding what they are and how they work and how we might go about treating dependence to them, or indeed, is that something that we even need to worry about at all, seems to have come out of nowhere. But before we get into all of that, my name is Jim Pavlik, and I'm the Senior Program and Policy Analyst at the Behavioral Health and Wellness Program in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. And joining me today is BHWP's Director, Professor of Psychiatry here at Anschutz, Dr. Chad Morris. We have no conflicts of interest to disclose, although we would like to note that to the extent that we offer any opinions, judgments, or speculation, those are entirely Dr. Morris's and my own and are not necessarily representative of BHWP as a whole, the Department of Psychiatry, or the university. During the presentation, we do invite you to use the chat or Q&A features to send in your questions. At the end of the prepared comments, we will answer those questions and any others that you have up to our ability to do so. And also, if you are not seeing the slideshow right now, the PowerPoint presentation, apparently if you look at the top of your screen, you should see a tab that says Jim P's screen, and you want to go ahead and select that. Our objectives today are really straightforward. We will offer a description of these products and separate them out from similar products already on the market and provide a tiny bit of their history and historical use. From there, we will discuss the factors that have led to their rising popularity, ending with current use prevalence rates. And from there, we will explore the potential benefits and harms of these products. And finally, we'll leave you with some clinical considerations. As you are no doubt aware, the novelty of these products means there's very little science on them, medical or otherwise. And so we will share with you those factors that are likely to be relevant to you as you discuss nicotine pouches as harm reduction alternatives for your patients, or if you are assisting patients with quitting the pouches themselves. So before we do anything else, we should spend a moment defining what it is that we're talking about. And what we're talking about is a class of products with a variety of names: nicotine pouches, oral nicotine pouches, and modern nicotine pouches. We've opted for oral nicotine pouches, which we'll be abbreviating ONP. Now, for some of you, this may be slightly confusing because oral nicotine pouches are a form of smokeless tobacco, and most smokeless tobacco products are placed in the mouth. These products are chewing tobacco, moist snuff, and snus. Collectively, these products are sometimes, although infrequently, called oral nicotine products and also abbreviated ONP. The designation of oral nicotine products seeks to distinguish from the other products dry snuff, which is rarely used outside specific cultural settings. And as such, the phrase oral nicotine products rarely shows up outside certain academic and commercial contexts. In any case, we are using the abbreviation ONP throughout this presentation to refer to oral nicotine pouches. And because we will be talking a lot today about electronic nicotine delivery systems like e-cigarettes, you should know that we use the acronym ENDS, or ENDS, ENDS, to refer to those products. ONP are small pre-portioned bags containing several ingredients. Most importantly, of course, is the nicotine. In addition to nicotine, the pouches also contain flavorings and sweeteners and plant fibers, which are used primarily as filler and to provide the pouch form and mass. These products are often called modern nicotine pouches to distinguish them from snus. While snus is very popular in some European countries, we are aware that many of you may not be familiar with it. Snus is the direct predecessor to ONP. Snus looks very similar to ONP. They are also pre-portioned small bags, which are intended, like ONP, to be placed in the mouth between the gum and the cheek or lip. These little bags, about the size of a piece of gum, are made of microfiber and resemble very small tea bags. These tea bags contain within them finely ground tobacco leaf, flavors, fillers, and other ingredients. Snus and ONP both have the nicotine absorbed through the mucosal linings of the mouth. No spitting is required. The key difference between snus and ONP is that ONP contain no tobacco leaf, thus making them, quote unquote, modern. Instead, the nicotine in ONP is extracted from tobacco leaf or synthesized, and we'll discuss the differences in just a moment. Each O&P bag contains between 2 and 10 milligrams of nicotine, although independent analyses have found up to 47.5 milligrams of nicotine in some countries. The most popular concentration as of this writing, and going back to at least 2019, has been the 6 milligram pouch. The second most popular concentration is the 3 milligram, although 4 milligrams is close behind and slightly edged out 3 milligrams. Long story short, 6 milligrams followed by 3 or 4 milligrams are for now the most popular concentrations. The top leading brands as of this writing are Zen, On, Velo, and Rogue. Zen is by far the most popular, possessing roughly 74% of the total market share as of the end of March 2024. It is worth noting here that each of these brands is owned by a pre-existing major tobacco interest. Zen is owned by Philip Morris, On by Altria, Velo by British American Tobacco, and Rogue is owned by Swisher International, the makers of Swisher Sweets cigars and owner of Helm Tobacco Company, which sells moist snuff, chew, and dry snuff. A fifth and sixth product that you may have heard about are Drift and Lift. Drift was originally made by Credit International, the makers of Clove cigars, but they have since been acquired by British American. Lift was the original name for Velo, and so it is also owned by British American. And these aren't the only acquisitions and mergers and brand name changes making this such a hard industry to follow from the outside. Easily the largest such acquisition was when Philip Morris launched a successful takeover bid for Swedish Match in 2022, placing in the hands of the largest tobacco company, the largest by far nicotine pouch company. There are, of course, new players arriving all the time. Rush nicotine pouches were very popular in 2021, appearing as the second most popular brand among both adolescents and young adults in one survey by Reach Lab out of Stanford. And Juicehead ZTN appeared on the most recent National Youth Tobacco Survey as the fifth most popular brand. Both of these manufacturers are small and new players, and both of them use purely synthetic nicotine. The ZTN in Juicehead ZTN stands for zero tobacco nicotine, an apparently truthful, although potentially misleading inclusion. While we can anticipate more churn with new players attempting to take advantage of O&P's burgeoning popularity, many of them disappearing, others being bought by the major players, the existence and persistence of the major players is both interesting and a cause for concern, as their profit motive and long history in selling addictive products encourages a certain sort of commercial ruthlessness. For example, Zen, already a market leader, has been accused by Credit International of filing, quote, a series of sham legal actions in order to drive them out of the O&P market. Courts eventually agreed with Credit that the Zen manufacturer did not have the trade secrets that they sued were stolen. More recently and more sinisterly, the British newspaper The Guardian recently published a story detailing how British American Tobacco strong-armed the Kenyan government into watering down nicotine pouch health warnings. According to documents The Guardian obtained, the manufacturer Velo threatened to pull investments for a pouch factory unless the government yielded to their demands, which included reducing the size of health warnings and removing references to the existence of cancer-causing tobacco-specific nitrosamines that would normally have been legally required. Although not entirely relevant to today's discussion, it is worth noting that these products already have an established global presence, and that different countries do regulate them in different ways, including not regulating them at all in Germany, Sweden, and the UK, banning them in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Singapore, treating them as tobacco products like we do here in the United States and also in Brazil. And in some countries, they are regulated and sold as nicotine replacement therapy. In fact, the original O&P was created by Carl Olav Fagerstrom. Many of you may have heard of the Fagerstrom test for nicotine dependence. Same person. In 2000, he founded a company called Niconovum, which still exists today and which sold the first O&P called Zonic. At first, Zonic was only sold in a 2 milligram version. Niconovum was bought by Reynolds American Inc. in 2009, and it in turn was acquired by British American Tobacco, the current manufacturer of Velo nicotine pouches. The original Zonic was and remains marketed as a therapeutic nicotine replacement therapy intended for those seeking to remain tobacco-free, to keep cravings at bay as they head toward nicotine abstinence. And you can visit their website today and read that this remains the company's stated objective, despite any apparent contradictions in Niconovum's parent company actively profiting from the recreational use of Velo. which is all to say that while a lot of the press about Zen and its competitors are about their novelty, their newness, and their sudden emergence, the fact is that these precise products have been available for over 2 decades. And the product they are essentially analogous to, snus, dates back several more decades, or rather centuries. One of Sweden's oldest brands is Etten, a brand of snus originally sold in 1822. And the non commercial use of powdered tobacco goes all the way back to Jean Nicot himself, the man for whom nicotine is named. It is almost certainly not a coincidence that the modern nicotine pouch has its origins in Sweden, where snus is the most popular way to consume nicotine. It's quite logical, in fact, that the Swedish-born Karl Olof Fagerstrom, or at least some Swede, would develop a nicotine replacement therapy that would be analogous to the most popular tobacco product of their home country. And of course, NRT by 2000 had already been sold for decades itself. But all of these are not ONP's only connection to the past. In more recent years, the modern nicotine pouch owes a lot of its sudden popularity to the explosion of the pod mods like Juul back in 2016 and 2017, which, by the way, is the same time that these pouches first appeared on US shelves. Juul and its competitors showed the world the possibility of nicotine products which contain no tobacco leaf, but that could still deliver nicotine at the same rate and volume as conventional cigarettes. This opened the door to the use of nicotine for so-called biological optimizers, also known as biohackers. They and their herd of online influencers have really helped promote the use of nicotine for enhanced cognitive performance, as well as some other and sometimes pretty bizarre health claims. For example, X-Fox personality Tucker Carlson has made the claim that nicotine pouches can cure erectile dysfunction, a claim that even Philip Morris has asked him to stop making. Juul's competitor Elf Bars had other lessons for the marketers of pouches as well, primarily the development and marketing of synthetic nicotine, or so-called tobacco-free nicotine or zero tobacco nicotine. Like the pod mods before them, nicotine pouch manufacturers that use synthetic nicotine have leaned hard into marketing that aspect of their product, saying that it tastes better, cleaner, and smoother, and implying that it's safer than plant-derived nicotine, and potentially leading some consumers into believing that it is less addictive than plant-derived nicotine, or even not addictive at all. And finally, pouches are pulling from the strategies their parent companies currently and historically have used to market their conventional tobacco products to the general public and to youth in particular. One such avenue is through marketing through sporting events, which on the one hand is a marketing no-brainer for companies that can afford it. Who wouldn't want their product in front of millions of eyeballs? On the other hand, while these products may offer a less harmful alternative for some current nicotine users, sports broadcasts are largely observed by non-nicotine users, including children. To some degree, and in some jurisdictions, this is controlled by prohibiting the use of brand names in sponsored billboards and posters and car wraps, etc. But this has led to the creative use of distinctive colors and shapes that quite obviously recall the brand, while allowing the manufacturers the veneer of plausible deniability. This is a type of marketing already so pervasive that it has its own name: alibi marketing. While the use of pouches is still very low relative to other tobacco products, the use is growing rapidly. As you can see in this graph from JAMA showing growth from July 2016 to June 2020, growth was slow in the first few years after they became available in 2016. However, there was a marked inflection point in April of 2019 as Zen, at that time still owned by Swedish Match, took off. Now, this may have made for national news in the following few months, were it not for the sudden emergence of EVALI, the vaping disease that hospitalized hundreds of young people and killed nearly 70 in the summer and fall of that year. And then, of course, COVID would take over the news shortly after that. A later analysis in JAMA Network Open revealed that growth did not slow down after the previous chart was made. Now, it's hard to do a side-by-side comparison of the data on these two charts because the horizontal axis covers different time spans, and the units have been changed from containers of pouches to the individual pouches themselves. However, we can see that whatever trend line had established itself between April of 2019 and June 2020 on the previous chart remained fairly steady until November of 2021, where once again, there is another inflection point primarily led by Zen and to a lesser extent, Altria's product called On. It is this spike that has captured the public interest. This is the beginning of what the Wall Street Journal called in a recent podcast, the Zendemic. According to the Wall Street Journal, Zen shipped 116 million cans in the fourth quarter of 2023, which was a 78% increase over the same quarter the year before. In the first quarter of 2024, they shipped 132 million cans, a 14% increase over the quarter before and 80% higher than the first quarter of 2023. All of this popularity has not been an unmitigated good, even for Philip Morris. Zen's seemingly unrelenting growth finally yielded to market forces when its current single factory in Owensboro, Kentucky became unable to meet the surging demand, sending the country into a nationwide shortage, advantaging competitors like On, Rogue, and Velo, whose market share has grown in recent months. Many users have also no doubt turned to the manufacturer's website for relief, but there they will find none because as of June 17th, Philip Morris has halted sales through its website after the Attorney General of Washington, D.C. subpoenaed a company as part of its office's investigation into whether they had violated D.C.'s ban on selling flavored tobacco products. In April, the FDA issued letters and money penalties to brick and mortar retailers who sold pouches to underage buyers. Now, we have mentioned both plant-derived and synthetic nicotine throughout this presentation. And I think this deserves a little bit of attention before we move into the next part of this webinar, as there seems to be some confusion surrounding this distinction, which seems to be confounded by the use of the phrase nicotine salts, which can be heard in reference to both pod mods like Juul and nicotine pouches like Zen. All of these products contain nicotine salts. That's nothing more than the nicotine molecule combined with an acid, typically benzoic acid. This combination of nicotine plus an acid allows for faster and more optimized absorption, allowing the nicotine in these products to obtain the same delivery, absorption, and metabolization rates as their conventional tobacco product counterparts. That is, for example, the nicotine in the plant material in a conventional cigarette, when released through burning and then inhaled, is able to be taken into the lungs and then rapidly transported to the brain in a matter of a few seconds. Nicotine taken in this way will peak after just about 5 minutes. In previous versions of e-cigarettes, using freebase nicotine extracted directly from the tobacco plant and not joined to an acid would peak after about 15 minutes or so and not nearly at the same concentration. Now, that's faster than some nicotine replacement therapies, but far slower than cigarettes or modern e-cigarettes like Juul. In fact, the nicotine in the nicotine replacement therapies is also absorbed slowly for this same reason. It's plant-derived. So all these emergent products are using these nicotine salt formulations, but this is not synthetic nicotine. The status of nicotine being either plant-derived or synthetic is entirely determined on where the nicotine is made, not on what it's combined with. If the nicotine is extracted from a plant, it is plant-derived or tobacco-derived. If it's made in a lab, it's synthetic. And this is more than a rhetorical flourish or a marketing spin. At the molecular level, pictured at the bottom of this slide, you can see some potentially important differences. For our purposes today, we need to understand only that nicotine has two forms, what are called S-nicotine and R-nicotine. Nicotine extracted from plants is S-nicotine. However, synthetic nicotine tends to be a blend of S-nicotine and R-nicotine, typically 50% or more R-nicotine. Currently, chemists have noted that S-nicotine seems to be more potent, but whether this means that R-nicotine is less addictive is still to be determined. At least anecdotally, from users of pod mods, this does not seem to be the case. R-nicotine seems to be just as addictive as S-nicotine in practice. Or it's possible that other factors in synthetic nicotine products might overwhelm R-nicotine's advantage in this regard. For example, a lower perception of risk, changes in taste, etc., may increase R-nicotine's dependence-causing features even as the form of the nicotine itself reduces it. One potential real advantage to synthetic nicotine is that it theoretically would lack tobacco-specific nitrosamines, which are known carcinogens found in tobacco products and in smaller quantities in plant-derived nicotine. Pouches using synthetic nicotine are the fastest-growing segment of the pouch class. So with the basics out of the way, I'm now going to turn our attention to patterns of use. Now, it is always the case that the use of tobacco products is in part mediated by marketing and advertising. But this is even more true with oral nicotine pouches right now. These are brand new products, and so marketing is being used both to raise awareness as to the existence of these products, as well as formulating the first impressions of these products on potential users. So before we get into describing current use rates, we should spend a bit more time talking about what the current marketing push looks like, who it's geared toward, and who is susceptible to hearing the positive claims of these products espoused by the manufacturers. The first thing we should note, and which we've already mentioned, is that many of these products are touted as tobacco-free or zero tobacco. This is mostly true of those products that use synthetic rather than plant-derived nicotine. While the pouch manufacturers are prevented by law from attaching such wording to a health claim, the implication's pretty clear. The word tobacco has long been attached to tobacco products, and until very recently, by far, the most prevalent tobacco product has been the cigarette. It's only been in the past couple of years, and only among young adults and adolescents, where cigarettes are not still the primary means of consuming tobacco. And it must be said that ENDS products using synthetic nicotine have also found great success in marketing those products as tobacco-free as well. The framing of these products as tobacco-free may also come with the inference in the mind of some consumers or potential consumers that they are, quote, free of nicotine, or at the very least, somehow less addictive. As we've already mentioned, while the use of synthetic nicotine may offer both a less harmful product and a less addictive one, there's still a lot we don't know about these products. Like Juul and other pod mods, the tobacco companies have relied heavily on both paid for and earned promotion through social media. As of last year, Velo had 17 accounts on Instagram, and they also had a radio station on YouTube that had over 1 million followers. Hashtags, including pouch product names, as well as the generic hashtag nicotine pouches, had views in the double and triple digit millions. The tobacco companies deny the hiring of social media influencers, but it is in fact the case that influencers, sometimes called zinfluencers, have a massive presence. And it should be noted also that influencers, unlike the tobacco companies' own websites, are not subject to any age restrictions for viewing. The case for pouches has been picked up by popular internet personalities like Joe Rogan, and to a lesser extent, Andrew Huberman and Tucker Carlson, among countless others. As a result of these social media campaigns, as well as traditional ones, awareness has spiked, as well it must have for them to have achieved the sales volumes that we've already seen. About 36% of teens, 40% of young adults, and 35% of adults ages 18 to 34 reported being aware of these products in 2022. But simply being aware of a product doesn't mean one will necessarily purchase it. Whether or not someone is susceptible to trying a nicotine product is essentially measured by their attitudes about the product and their reported willingness to try it. On this measure, we can see that interest varies by current tobacco use status. The most interest is among those who use multiple tobacco products, which in this particular survey meant both combustible products like cigarettes and non-combustible products, by which they meant both smokeless as well as vaped products. The second most interested group at 34% are those who use non-combustible products exclusively. And this makes sense whether we're thinking of the ends user who is already familiar with nicotine salt-based products and is perhaps already plugged into social media algorithms delivering ends advertising through them on Instagram, TikTok, and others, or if we're considering the smokeless user who is already familiar with the modality of inserting tobacco products between their lip and gum. The least interested are those teens who currently don't use any tobacco products. Although here it may be alarming to some that 15% of teens who do not use any nicotine products are interested in trying nicotine pouches. A statistic like this, should it prove representative, would likely be taken very seriously by the FDA as they consider their continued acceptance of these products. We would assume that perception of risk would mediate whether interest in these products leads to actual use. And here opinions are divided. Teens surveyed were unsure if pouches were any safer than cigarettes or ends. In fact, divided is a pretty good word here, with nearly 50% agreeing with the sentiment that they are less harmful, regardless if the comparison was with cigarettes or ends. Adults were less divided on the issue, with only 23%, less than a quarter, agreeing that pouches were likely safer than cigarettes. It is also worth pointing out here that using phrases like tobacco-free does lead consumers into lowering their perception of risk of these products. So we'll likely see this particular angle continuing and likely growing. Synthetic nicotine products, as we've already mentioned, are the fastest growing segment of the ONP lines. Those that have already experimented with or transitioned to ONP cite several reasons for their use. None of these are particularly surprising, as they mirror pretty well the reasons respondents give when asked why they use ends. Listed here are the top reasons, although they are not listed in any particular order. Curiosity is a major reason, and that makes sense given the newness of these products and the highest awareness of these products residing among those who already use multiple products. So we would expect that an openness to new products is a pretty big part of their general disposition as buyers, and the pouch's novelty alone, therefore, would be of value. Flavors, of course, are a dominant reason for any users of end products that provide a variety of flavors. The majority of ends use, for example, is use of flavored products. Ease of use and the ability to use in places where conventional tobacco products are banned also shows up on these surveys. And lastly, and likely most importantly, is harm reduction or health. Harm reduction and health have been historically the number one reasons that smokers were switching to ends. So we would expect that ONP curious smokers would be primarily led by the promise of harm reduction. Health may be less of a rationale for younger adults and teens who by and large do not smoke, but rather vape. Although it doesn't appear on this list yet, I wouldn't be surprised to find that teens in the next few years start to consider pouches as their pathway for stopping vaping. In fact, in a recent study looking at how patches are referenced on the website Reddit, they found that researchers found that 6% of all posts were questions about ONP for that purpose. And so this will all lead us to prevalence. Among adolescents, use for the moment is pretty low, about 1% of middle schoolers and 2.4% of high schoolers. And for now, these numbers seem to be holding steady as the National Youth Tobacco Survey just released their 2024 results, and these numbers are flat over 2023. However, we should be aware that nearly a quarter of those reporting past 30 days use are also reporting daily use, which for tobacco products is highly correlated with the development of tobacco use disorder in adults. Other studies and anecdotes that BHWP can report from our partners in the field cast some doubt on whether these national figures aren't perhaps diluting regional spikes in use. Some non-representative surveys have found youth use as high as 11 or 12%. Among adults, a likely more accurate figure, current use is about 3%, and lifetime use is nearly double that. And this is interesting as it does indicate that quite a few more people are trying these products than are sticking to them. And this will be a theme that we'll return to in the next section of the webinar. While use among adults hovers in the mid-single digits, use among both current and former tobacco users is over 16%. This is another factor that the FDA may take into consideration into the overall public health impact of these products, as even if we can establish that they do offer a lower risk alternative to cigarettes, there is no safe form of tobacco use, and encouraging ex-smokers to relapse to nicotine is a net negative to overall impact. As with interest, we see that use is highest among current and former ends and cigarette users, and they are also more popular among men and 45. And on that note, I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Morris to mention our clinical considerations.
Great, Jim. Thanks very much for setting that foundation. And now we just want to spend some time talking about the practical implications of everything that the information Jim just imparted. So in this final section, we want to take what we've learned about ONP and combine those facts with what we know about tobacco and nicotine product use and nicotine dependence in general. And so by this synthesis, we want to provide you with some clinical recommendations as you work collaboratively with your clients or your patients who are either actively using these products or considering using these products in the future. The elephant in the room is the potential for harm reduction. ONP may present, which, as we've already mentioned, may present an option for that, and we've mentioned that that is the primary reason for their use for a lot of people. So currently, particularly, at a federal level, there's often an avoidance of entering the harm reduction debate or taking an overt stand, and that's very much in the mix right now, and that's a bit problematic because this is exactly what many of you on the call today, as well as current or potential ONP users, want more information about. Most ONP users aren't even familiar with the term harm reduction. They just want to know if these products are safe, and many current smokers and vapors are looking to quit or reduce their use because they know it's unhealthy. Many current smokers, for instance, may not be seeking to achieve perfect or optimal health, but they merely want to take steps to reduce what they very well know is a extremely dangerous habit. As we move through the section, we at BHWP want to be really clear that we wish to assist individuals to stop all nicotine use. Nicotine dependence is an addiction like any other addiction that can have health, psychological, social, financial, and other consequences. That said, individuals deserve to know what the evidence base tells us about these products so that they can increase their health literacy and make informed individual decisions about how to move forward. What we once called big tobacco, I think we really now should just be calling big nicotine, as they are very much, they're banking on creating these new consumers for products like ONP. And if we don't provide evidence-based guidance, the industry is more than happy to fill the knowledge gap with half-truths and questionable claims that very often target the most at-risk populations out there. So, can ONP be used to reduce or quit smoking, to reduce harm to oneself and even others exposed to smoke? We're going to try to answer that question in several ways. To start, it's important to know that when people are addicted to nicotine or any drug, they often aren't even conscious of how they're using these products to maintain their level of dependence. Individuals adjust the frequency, the duration, and amount of the substances that they take to match their level of dependence. While companies selling these products or their proxy influencers might directly or they might indirectly make claims of reduced danger or harm, we have to really look to how people actually use these products and what the outcomes are to truly speak to the level of potential harm. Importantly, we must consider whether and to what extent non-smokers, whether they be former or never tobacco users, like a lot of youth, might take up these products. We're largely, again, talking, about the dangers to youth here. Even if individual current tobacco users obtain a harm reduction benefit, we have to look at the population level effects. And this could easily be erased by the number of newly addicted individuals. When talking about harm reduction, we need to start with the fact that there is a consensus that cigarettes are by far the deadliest form of tobacco use. There are at least 480,000 deaths each year in the US due exclusively to cigarette use. And this is probably an undercount in several ways. For instance, this figure doesn't include deaths from pipes, cigars, hookah, chew, dips, snus, snuff, vaping. Um, and in addition to that, the CDC additionally cites another 41,000 deaths per year among non-smokers exposed to secondhand cigarette smoke. Cigarette smoke causes 10 of the country's top 13 killers, including the top two, those being lung cancer and heart disease. Looking at smokeless tobacco, it also has a 50-fold increase in the risk of certain cancers, specifically those of the mouth, throat, esophagus, and the pancreas. But it's got to be noted that these cancers are more rare. In part, these cancers are rare because the prevalence of a rate of smokeless tobacco like chew is quite low in comparison to smoking cigarettes. Smoking is simply and indisputably the most harmful of all current ways to consume nicotine. But unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there too. Surprisingly for me, in a recent survey of medical professionals, 80% erroneously believed that nicotine was the cause of cancer and COPD and cardiovascular disease in their patients. So let's be clear in this forum that it is absolutely not. While nicotine is not entirely safe, it is associated with some diseases on its own. Its primary role in the development of diseases in tobacco users is its extremely highly addictive potential that draws dependent individuals into using cigarettes and other products that do then cause these diseases and mortality and morbidities. The cause of tobacco related death and disease is the tobacco smoke itself and its constituent particles, which include several known toxins and known carcinogens like carbon monoxide, aromatic hydrocarbons, tobacco-specific nitrous amines, formaldehyde, solid particulate matter, heavy metals, and others. And again, this by no means implies that smokeless tobacco is safe as well. I mean, there's 28 known carcinogens in smokeless tobacco, including the tobacco specific nitrous amines present in tobacco smoke. So, compared to that, ONPs and vaping products don't have many of these chemicals found in smoked or smoke so combustible products or the smokeless tobacco products. And therefore, they do offer a possible harm reduction alternative to cigarettes. As with past vaping products, where things get complicated for ONPs, is the ability to addict individuals to nicotine generally, and then possibly the prevalence of then co-use of these products and cigarettes or other tobacco products. So with ONP and all nicotine containing products, we can look at their addiction potential, and that's very important. Abuse liability, that's just a fancy way of measuring how addictive a product appears to be in comparison to other products. And it's comprised of three factors when we look at the maximum concentration of nicotine achieved during exposure, how quickly that maximum is reached, and how much nicotine a person is exposed to in total each time the product is used. So each session of nicotine use itself. A longer time to max bioconcentration, a lower max concentration, or lower exposure to nicotine, those would all result in a lower risk of dependence. And so we're going to get into that a little bit now. In a recent, and this was an industry funded experiment, and there's very little evidence base out there. But the maximum concentration of nicotine in ONPs was equivalent to cigarettes, although the time to reach that maximum was much longer, and the overall nicotine exposure was higher. So some mixed results there. It should also be recognized in the study that the exposure um, to the ONP was twice as long as what the tobacco industry recommends. So people were using it 1 hour instead of 30 minutes. So, and we're going to get kind of into why that is important. So let's break this down a little bit. So straightforwardly, we have mixed results, as I said. The time to max concentration being longer indicates that ONPs might be less dependent, lead to less dependence, causing than cigarettes. And so for this variable, you should look at where the peak is along the x-axis. So that's what you can see of the cigarette peak very quickly. That's the yellow line that you're seeing. So as Jim mentioned, this enters the bloodstream and gets up to the brain incredibly quickly, and it maxes out between 5 and 10 minutes from first exposure. So that's a major reason why cigarettes are so incredibly addictive. But their max concentration was equivalent to cigarettes and OMPs. Here you're looking at how high the peaks are. Here you can see the yellow peak in between the green Nordic and brown on lines at the top and the purple scruff and the red Zin lines below. It is worth noting that the 10 milligram Zin has the lowest peak. But you're seeing these fairly equivalent peaks in that regard. And then ONP's overall nicotine exposure is higher, indicating a greater abuse potential. So on this chart, it's a little hard to show you the total exposure, but it's equivalent to the areas underneath each of the lines. So the fact that cigarettes peak so early and are metabolized so rapidly means that there is less nicotine below the yellow line over the course of the 6 hours of this particular study compared to the ONP lines. Interestingly, the 6 milligram ONP, although lower in nicotine volume, actually created higher maximum concentrations in the body than their 10 milligram counterparts. And while that may seem a bit confusing, really it's reflected in the sales data, where the 6 milligram patch is by far the most popular concentration. However, as I said earlier, how these products should be used and how they are used in practice are important differences that impact whether we should consider these avenues for harm reduction. So, just because an industry says that a product should be used in this amount does not mean that that's how people are going to use them. And one of the best ways to look at actual use is to simply ask consumers what they think of these products in comparison to other tobacco products out there. Individuals who've tried these products find them less likable or less satisfying than either cigarettes or smokeless products, and less likely to address cravings. ONP does end up being more likable than NRT, nicotine replacement therapy, gum, compared, so and it's a fairly large difference there. But that's at the same time, ONP was found less satisfying than NRT. So this might be a good news or a bad news situation. On the good side, we can often interpret words like likable and satisfying. Those are really euphemisms for addictive, how addictive these are. So simply put, the nicotine from ONP does not give a rapid hit like the nicotine from a cigarette. That's when we were seeing that peak on the previous slide. This is likely reflective of the slower time to maximum concentration from these products. So this may be an indicator that these products are less likely to lead to dependence. On the bad news side of things, current ONP may be the most analogous to earlier models of vape products. So those kind of pre-Juul models that were out there. These two were reported as being less satisfying than cigarettes. They are also heavily used by current adult smokers looking for a pathway away from cigarettes. And that's what we think we're seeing with, or going to see with ONP. Unfortunately, because these smokers' nicotine dependence level wasn't matched, and because the vape products they were using in the past were considered unsatisfying, this led to several issues. First, people became dual users. At the time, think back to around 2015 or so, about two-thirds of all vape users were also smoking cigarettes. They were co-users, or what we call dual users. It also led to a lot of relapses. About half of smokers who had transitioned to vapes had relapsed back to smoking within a year. And finally, initiation of ex-smokers and nicotine naive users. Many never smokers are lured by the promise of lower risk and the availability of several attractive flavors, or many, many attractive flavors that will probably be coming. You experimented with vaping, but then transitioned to become smokers, either as those dual users or as cigarette exclusive smokers as well. That these products are particularly likable or satisfying is reflected in the fact that many users that experiment with these products aren't staying with them. This inability to fully address cravings leads to dual use and has some experimental evidence behind it as well. Even a very, very recent, the last few weeks, a study looking at ONP, um, really looking to see if ONP might be an attractive harm reduction technique for low SES users who were unwilling to quit nicotine altogether. So this is some of the findings that they had, is that they did find that individuals who used NOP to reduce smoking did succeed in doing that. So they reduced their cigarette use from about 15 to 8 cigarettes a day. However, in the other arm of the trial, individuals using vaping products were actually even more successful. So they dropped their cigarette use a bit more, from 15 to 13. So in summary, if we're comparing ONP to vape products, the vape products are outperforming ONP in that regard. But we have to hasten to point out that there that there's evidence that while these levels of smoking reduction should be celebrated in their own right among patients, these really are undesirable endpoints to achieve what we're calling harm reduction. That's because studies indicate that to achieve only 50% reduction in cancer risk through reducing cigarettes per day, reduction of the cigarettes has to be closer to like 75%. So another way of saying this is that you basically have to you got to get people to zero. You got to get people to get down to using none of these products if they're really going to see the health benefits. And a lot of individuals just don't understand that. They think that if they reduce any extent that they're really helping their health, and there's just not a lot of empirical evidence to support that. That said, Zonic, an identical product that Jim was talking about, it's been sold in Northern Europe as a nicotine replacement therapy for 20 years. But to our knowledge, this hasn't led to any kind of significant nicotine abstinence in those countries. So they might be using Zonic and transitioning to that, but they might become lifelong Zonic users. So again, our ultimate goal is to get people off of nicotine altogether. So these last few points all lead us to the potential pitfalls of ONP, which have some really significant shortcomings. So while in theory, they absolutely do present the possibility for decreased danger or harm reduction, but it really remains to be seen if this promise is going to be fulfilled when these products are studied in real life, meaning how people actually use these products. As we mentioned, ONP exposure exposes the users to very few known toxins, and those using synthetic nicotine to even fewer toxins, and making ONP the least harmful tobacco products at this time that we know of. However, they do present a substantial, although unknown, risk to cause dependence in non-dependent nicotine users. And again, among those nicotine naive users, which we're talking about youth particularly, while at the same time being less satisfying than available nicotine containing products that are known to be more dangerous. People are going to start co-using, as we mentioned, and have that dual use and relapse potentially to smoking cigarettes as well. And of course, as we discussed at the beginning of this presentation, we can't ignore that tobacco companies, once again, seem to be targeting youth and this is going to directly undercut any public health gains these products can offer in terms of individual reductions. Finally, really quickly, we're going to look at nicotine toxicity. It's very hard for anyone to fatally overdose on nicotine, but it's not impossible. Um, I'm not going to go into this case report here. It has all the available information if you want to look this up. But the point is, again, that it's not how the industry says we should use these products. It's really how people end up using them. And in this case, this was a gentleman that was gravitating towards use to help his concentration in studying, and was taking way too much nicotine and got toxic. This has been the case with a lot of different products out there that aren't nicotine, but nicotine is definitely one of those. Um, Vaping has been the most popular way for adolescents to take in nicotine since 2015. And as those adolescents have grown into adults, they've brought this use with them. And along with that use, as they enter college and so forth, they're again using these products for concentration, attention, and so forth. And we're going to see some cases like this where people are getting toxic in taking too much of this. And, kind of bottom line is that young people are under a lot of pressure to succeed in an information dense world, and are looking to products like nicotine as cognitive boosters to increase their perceived value in society. And so online influencers are already touting ONP as a study aid. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this. So moving, our final consideration today is whether these products are good as cessation devices. And until we get more studies, I mean, there's really very, very little out there right directly looking at this. So a lot of this is just speculation at this point, uh, or just indirect evidence. We have already noted that Zonic is marketed in Europe as a medicinal nicotine replacement therapy. It has not been given that approval by the FDA in the US. Pharmaceutically and anecdotally, it does share some characteristics with nicotine replacement therapy. Pharmaceutically, we have a refined pharmaceutical grade nicotine in Sonic. And this is especially true for those synthetic products. We also know from the industry studies that it takes about 60 minutes for the nicotine to peak in the blood, which is more or less in line with some other nicotine replacement therapy or patches as well. And of course, we have the subjective reports where the products are perceived to be more or less as likable or satisfying as NRT. This is not a scientific measure of the abuse liability, but it's an indicator that should a person successfully transition from a more addictive product like cigarettes, they might, this is a very big might see their dependence reduced if they were to fully transition just to these products. So here's some important caveats, and it really leads to our final recommendations. So first, we should note again that there's no proven safe form of nicotine use. As reviewed, while cigarettes or combustible products cause the greatest harm, nicotine itself has some implication in the development of some diseases. And this is especially true for users younger than 25. So for those users, nicotine acts as other addictive drugs do, so that they can physically alter the brain. They can include having can include stunning development of your executive decision making. It can make future drug use disorders more likely. So abstinence from all nicotine should always use for our patients, for our clients, and the goal we should encourage them to make for themselves. And if they do choose abstinence, or for that matter, if they choose to merely reduce their current use of conventional tobacco products, then the gold standard way to do that is a combination of FDA approved pharmacotherapy combined with behavioral therapies, so counseling, quit lines, things of that nature. We can further add that we highly recommend what we call an opt-out approach to treatment. So if you're a provider out there, really treating this like other chronic illnesses and substance use disorders, that treatment should be provided to a patient or client unless they overtly state that they don't want it. And we have lots of protocols for how to proceed as far as medications and counseling. That's beyond the scope of today, but those are out there. So clinical recommendations. Many of our clients or patients have already tried and failed to quit smoking. Unfortunately, most have used no aids, so they haven't used counseling or medications. But for those who have used nicotine replacement therapy, it may not have worked, or they may not be interested in these products. They may only entertain making a quit attempt with pouches or other vaping products, for instance. Because of all the uncertainties surrounding these products and the fact that they're not FDA approved, no healthcare provider at this point should be recommending these products. Even if this pathway is accepted in the spirit of, let's meet patients where they're at. We don't want to talk down the folks that are saying they want to use OMP to manage their smoking, but rather we can offer education about more evidence-based options that they have out there. Um, and there's a few other things you can do too as you start to work with folks. One is just make sure you are measuring their level of dependence, and you can do that through the Fagerstrom test for nicotine dependence or some other validated tool. This is so that if they're using ONP to reduce their dependency, you can measure change across time, and at the same time, again, educate in how they can move to possibly more FDA approved modalities, treatment modalities. You can help them set goals to move from ONP to these products over the course of time and hopefully get to zero ONP or other tobacco or nicotine products. often cravings will still be there, and that's a good way to talk about how gum lozenge might be effective in helping them go down that road of FDA-approved pharmacotherapy. Um, and just keep the door open and ask to provide education over time. Patients that reduce their use of conventional tobacco products, some complacency might set in, and they might feel like, hey, they've done enough, they've achieved that harm reduction, if you will. But we need to remind them that they have to get to zero nicotine use if they're really going to protect their health over time. Uh, and um, as long as the patient continues to use a recreational product, their dependence really remains at the whim of tobacco companies, and they can choose at any time to change the recipe, if you will, to make them more addictive, as we saw with adding nicotine salts in the vaping products. So, bottom line is, let's meet be collaborative and with folks as you're working with them, but really try to navigate them to what we know works from an evidence-based perspective. And that's what we have to offer you. So I
Well,
know we only have a few more minutes. I'm going to turn it over to Jim again.
yeah. So first, we have a couple questions in the Q&A. I encourage others to get them in. Even if we don't answer them live, we're happy to respond to you after the fact. And Angie has just put in the evaluation link. We'd love for you to spend 2 or 3 minutes of your time just to let us know how what you thought of what you heard today. I do want to get into some of these questions. Jack has asked one about how we distinguish between blip, excuse me, and ONP. And for those who don't know, blip it's just nicotine replacement therapy, but it has a whole new flashy ad campaign, some new colors, specifically targeting the youth and the adolescent and young adult, or I guess I should say the young adult audiences, and trying to get them on board with nicotine replacement therapy. And Jack's asked, how do we distinguish between NRT and ONP for cessation? And I think it really goes to Chad's final point about the manufacturer. The bottom line is that corporate manufacturers who profit off people using their products have absolutely no interest in making sure that people eventually become nicotine abstinent. That's not their goal. Their goal is to create lifelong users. And if they started to see that their market share were falling, they would alter the recipe, they would change their marketing strategies, they would do whatever it took to make sure that people don't put nicotine behind them. Not that the pharmaceutical industry has a great reputation, but it certainly has a better reputation in that particular regard. And so I would be focusing on the profit motive and the corporations behind the ONP products, and treating nicotine replacement therapy as medicine, and making sure that we talk about nicotine replacement therapy in the context of medicine. For example, under making sure we list NRT as part of MAT, medication assisted therapy. Candace has asked, is it possible for people to become more addicted because of the way they use, when they're vaping, when they're using these pouches, maybe when they're using some other products, they don't have to take breaks, right? Like with cigarettes, you're not allowed to smoke where you work. You can't smoke in many public areas. You can't smoke while you're eating in restaurants, and so you're forced to take breaks from nicotine. And so what this impacts is an area of addiction science that is called the lag, the moments in between where withdrawal is allowed to set in, and what your tolerance is for those withdrawal symptoms and other things. So somebody can be addicted, for example, and only use nicotine, say smoking, every Saturday when they go out to the bar with their friends. Just because they only use once a week doesn't mean that they wouldn't have a tobacco use disorder if we went through a diagnostic assessment. Just used to a 6-day lag. And so there's one way to, I think we can just say to Candace directly, yes, we would be talking about the frequency and intensity of use going up in those situations. It might not affect the way they are tiered on a validated instrument like the Fagerstrom, and it doesn't necessarily change a lot about what our treatment approach would be. It would be something that we'd have to handle from a psychoeducational point of view to let them know that they're just going to experience the onset of cravings, for example, other withdrawal symptoms much more rapidly than somebody who normally has spaces between their nicotine use sessions. Somebody's asked if CU has issued a statement about Zen. Not to my knowledge. Chad, do you know if CU has issued a statement about the Zen factory that's coming into Aurora?
I do not believe so.
Are there known health effects of OND at this time, such as the cancer disease of the gum? Uh, no, just because for long-term chronic diseases like cancers to develop, it just takes years of exposure. That's what we already see, even with known cancer-causing agents in, say, other smokeless tobacco products like chew and snus and those others. Nicotine itself is a caustic compound. It does irritate the skin. And so one of the things that people get when they use chew, for example, is leukoplakias, like these sores in the mouth. And these tend to be precancerous, and they do eventually lead to cancers if we wait long enough. We would we would anticipate seeing something like leukoplakia develop in this situation because it would be developing through the same caustic pathways. But until these products are more widely used, this is an unfortunate like guinea pig problem. But until these products are used more frequently for longer durations of time than we've currently had time to have, we're not going to see those effects yet. And that does put us 1 minute over. Again, if you can scroll up through the chat and hit that eval link, we would really appreciate it. And otherwise, we will look forward to seeing you virtually through the next Clinical Edge webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.